Okay, so here we are again. This is In Conservation with. I am David Lindo, also known as the Urban Birder. And tonight, in fact, the whole series is sponsored by Leica Sport Optics. So thank you very much. Tonight is a man that I'd like to swap places with, actually, not only because of photography, but I love the books behind him. I'll be sort of wafting through those books. David Tipling, bird photographer, natural history photographer extraordinaire, as far as I'm concerned. How are you, and where are you?
Hello, David. Well, I'm in Holt in North Norfolk, so at home on a very windy evening. Been blowing a gale here today.
And you are well. You're all good, yeah.
Yeah. Very well. Yeah.
What would you call yourself? A wildlife photographer? What would you label yourself as?
Uh, yeah, wildlife photographer, I think. But to make a living, over the last 30 years, I've had to learn to sort of write and speak publicly and do all sorts of things within the sort of photography world. So um, you sort of become a jack of many trades, I suppose. But yeah, always at the core of it's been photographing wildlife and mainly birds, I guess. I mean, that's been my main passion, photographing birds. But I get involved with photographing all sorts of other things to do with the environment, from kids in doing things in nature to um, pollution, landscapes, all sorts of different things. But yeah,
Okay, because one thing I remember reading about you, in fact, you wrote it yourself, which always stuck in my mind, and that was I think it must have been about 15, 16, maybe 17 years ago. You wrote something somewhere saying that in the past you used to make a lot of money from photography, from the various photographic agencies and stuff, and now or then even it was like you're lucky to get 50 quid a month. So you then had to turn your hand, as you said just now, to other
yeah,
things, including training as well.
yeah,
So I can, because everyone and his dog is now a photographer. I mean, we are all photographers now, aren't we? We've got
yeah.
cameras. Because in the past, it was very much an art that, you had to use film and stuff. Is that what you did in the beginning? Use film?
Yeah. When I started, so I took my first pictures in 1978 with an old Zenith camera, and yeah, it was film. I used to use black and white film, Ilford black and white film, and Agfa color print film, and then sort of progressed onto Kodachrome later on. But yeah, and so in the late 70s, but it wasn't birds that actually drew me into photography to start with. Really, when I was a teenager, I studied up to Brands Hatch with some friends to watch the motor racing at the weekends, and um, it was going to Brands that I sort of had this urge to take pictures, and so I started photographing the motor racing to start with, and I've always harboured a dream to be a sports photographer, I suppose. I'd have loved to have photographed motorsport, if I'll be honest. But so the bird photography came kind of shortly after the cars,
Okay.
and then yeah, I was doing both in sort of tandem.
Okay. Well, what I was going to do actually is quickly just run through for those who aren't familiar with David in terms of his background. I mean, you are, as you say, a professional wildlife photographer, not only well known within the UK but renowned across the world. And I think most of us will have at least one book in our collection with your photographs. I found one in mine.
Oh yes.
This tome you worked on for a long time, didn't you?
Yeah. That was 6 to 8 year, yeah, 6 or 7 years in the end. Yeah, a lot of work.
Yeah. But anyway, you're obviously well known for photographing lots of different types of wildlife other than just birds. Now, you were born in Sussex in Hove, a town that I know actually quite well, actually. and you've been birding since a young age. So the question I like to ask you is the classic question, which my American friends always phrase quite nicely. What was your spark bird?
It was a nuthatch, and I remember it vividly, David. It was when I was 9. So I went to a school, and we had like there were three kind of floors. It was part of the school was in a really big old Victorian house, and one of the classrooms was in a sort of an attic, and there was a window. Um, it's all still there actually, but it's an old people's home now. But there was a window, and just outside the window was a big oak tree, and the teacher had put fixed a bird table to the windowsill, and so you get constant stream of birds coming to this bird table, and I was far more interested in the birds than obviously the lesson, particularly when you're 9. And just one day this nuthatch appeared, and it was just so different to all the blue tits and great tits that had been coming, and it looked, yeah, really impressive with that dagger bill and stuff. And I don't remember this, but my mother tells me that I went home and asked them what they thought it was, and classic thing for our generation, they got me the Observer's Book of Birds, and that was it really. And now I can remember, um, we had to walk a couple of miles home. So we lived a couple of miles from a school, so we used to walk it both ways. And I can remember seeing things like redwings and stuff just feeding on the grass verges and things on their route home and stuff like that. So there were certain birds that sort of stuck in my mind. But yeah, that engendered an interest in birds, and that was it really. And I joined the YOC, Young Ornithologists Club, and in Tunbridge, where I lived, they had a really good group. The leaders there were really good at taking the kids out. Most weekends, there was a field trip somewhere. So I can remember on those field trips seeing my first nightjar and my first hen harrier roost and things like that. Things that really kind of stick with you when you're young. And I was hooked basically. Yeah, but it kind of vied with fishing as well. I was really into fishing. Well, I still do a bit of it now actually here, but so I had a lot of mates and we would go fishing quite a bit, because I didn't know any other birders other than the people who turned up at the YOC groups, and they all lived a little way away, so I used to just go birding on my own. So fishing was probably a bit more social, and I go off with them to do that. But yeah.
So your parents bought you your first camera. Do you remember what it was? Was it something that could actually be used to take pictures of birds?
Well, yeah, it was a Zenith EM, one of the old Russian camera. But they didn't buy me a lens. They didn't buy me a lens to go with it. I had to buy that myself. So I got a job when I was 13 selling eggs door to door. So I had this egg round in Hildenborough where we lived, Tunbridge. And I used to sell, I think, something like 60 or 70 dozen eggs a week door to door. And I had this old converted pram, and the farmer used to bring these big boxes of eggs, and I'd load this pram up, and I would go from door to door selling these eggs. And I can remember I got 5p a dozen, but at Christmas you used to get these really good tips. People used to leave out these really big tips, and I saved up and I bought a Vivitar 400mm lens to go with the camera. And then once I had that, I was set really. And but because 400mm, that's still not that long really. It was probably a good kind of training for fieldcraft and stuff, because I would just go off walking the fields and along the River Medway and just try and creep up on things basically. And I learned to sort of stalk things, and I mean, being a birder as well, I suppose that helped to sort of read the reactions of birds, what they were likely to do and stuff.
Yeah,
And
because you're obviously self-taught, and it says that your craft was, as you say, trial and error.
yeah.
What was you went to Bow Beach Reservoir a lot? Was that your main patch where you learnt to ply your trade?
Well, my patch was a place called Haysden and Barden in Tunbridge, which are gravel pits along the River Medway. Really good inland site actually, and I saw. I think my Haysden list is close to 200. It's about 198 or something. My mother still lives down there, so whenever I go and visit my mum, I try and get a couple of hours on the old patch, see what's around. So I used to go there a lot. And as you know, as an inland bird, just finding a wheatear or a winchat or whatever, and especially when you're young, a migrant like that, it was really exciting. And I got a lot out of it. But Bow Beach was kind of the place in West Kent, really. That was the place that turned up the occasional really exciting bird. So that was 10 miles away. And I could never persuade my dad to take me there. So I used to cycle. And the first time I cycled there, there was a pair of barn owls breeding there. And I got there middle of the afternoon, and I got approached by this chap on the causeway, and it was Roy Coles, who was the warden. Sadly, he died last year, but Roy was a photographer for the Ministry of Defence as well, a very keen bird photographer, and he basically took me under his wing. Really, he became my sort of photographic mentor. When I told him I was interested in photography, that was it. Really, he was fantastic, and he allowed me to put hides up in the reserve, and really helped me with my technique, and just uh, gave me a lot of encouragement, and uh, yeah, put me on the right path really. So I owe him a lot really, because he set me on the path.
Okay, I got two questions actually. Firstly, what kind of photography? I mean, obviously we're gonna look at some of the stuff work you've done, but how do you describe your photography? And also, who are your influences? What kind of influence have you got to take your photographs?
My photography has changed dramatically. So, and it's partly changed due to the market. When when I went freelance, so I had sort of like normal jobs for 10 years, and then got to
When you say normal jobs, what kind of? I'm interested. I'm more interested in that. What normal jobs did you do?
okay. So when I left school, I worked for Sainsbury's. Then I don't know how I managed it, but I managed to get a job, NatWest Bank. I didn't even have a maths qualification. I didn't even get a CSE in maths. I went to a big comprehensive school, and I wasn't very good at school at all. I didn't apply myself like I should have done really, and I wanted to leave as soon as I could. But anyway,
You,
um,
you and I like.
right. Well, I kind of made my mind up. I wanted to be a photographer, but of course, I hadn't really thought through how I was going to do it. But I left anyway, and so anyway, I ended up working for NatWest for 2 or 3 years, and then I saw a job advertised for an assistant auditor for Anglia Building Society, which offered a company car. And I thought, well, this is perfect for a twitching. If I can get a company car, I can be off around the country at the company's expense. So anyway, to my surprise, I got the job, but it was partly because the manager who interviewed me was quite keen on birds. So when he started the interview, he didn't really ask me much about, well, he didn't really ask me much about my experience, or anything about the job. He was more interested in what birds I'd seen, and that sort of thing. So we got on really well. So yeah, so then I did that for must have been 8 years, I guess. And then then I then I met a girl who in South London who it was at a branch I was auditing, and she we kind of fell for each other, but she had decided that she was already going to go off around the world, and she bought a round the world ticket anyway. So she went off to Australia, and I was left here, and I was kind of, I'd got to the stage where I was already really thinking I've got to try and make the break and do the photography full time. I'd started to sell pictures, and I could kind of see where I could go. I could kind of see that I could make a living. And I was quite lovesick with this girl. Anyway, I went to my manager and I said, I'd really love to go to Australia for an extended time. And to my surprise, they let me take all my holiday in one go. So I had like a month and 2 days holiday or something. And I went off to Australia to see this girl. But unbeknown to me, she had got with an Australian in the meantime. So when I got there, it was all a bit of a disaster. But anyway, we ended up traveling around Australia for a bit. But that made my mind up. It made me. I decided when I was there, right, when I get back, I am quitting the job, and I'm gonna do the photography. It kind of, that experience, I suppose, it jolted me into thinking, right, I've got to do something with my life here. And when I got back, the first day back, before I even thought about handing my notice in, my manager called me and he said, David, he said, I know you've been talking about wanting to do your photography. Well, I've got some good news for you. We've got to halve the department, and if you want, you can get voluntary redundancy. And that was perfect. So I think I got 13,000 quid, and suddenly I had this 13,000 quid, and I just thought, right, I had a house, but I had a mortgage and everything, but I thought, right, I've got this money, I can really try and make a go of it now. And so I did. So that was 1992, and the previous year, actually, I'd gone on a trip to China, to Beidaihe, and I'd been so kind of entranced, whatever, by that. It was just, I just thought it was amazing. I was desperate to get back there and photograph Siberian migrants in spring. So rather stupidly, when I look back at it, I once I'd left my job, I thought, oh, I'll go off to Beidaihe for 6 weeks. So I went off to China for 6 weeks, when really I should have been staying at home photographing robins on fork handles in my back garden, because I never really made any money out of those pictures from China. But I did make a lot of money out of robins on fork handles during that period. So it was, you learn by your mistakes. I had no one to guide me through the.
Yeah, but that's not a mistake, David. I mean, I think that's part of what you need to experience. It's one of those things you have to do.
Yeah.
Now, your job with the car, it kind of reminds me of the fact that when I started my other jobs before doing what I'm doing now, should I say, I was in media sales, and I got a job with a car, and I could travel the whole UK, and it was amazing because I was just plan my meetings around where rarities were.
Yeah.
But I remember one time I was working for a company who weren't very good. I mean, we were having a bad time together, and they'd given me a yellow warning, a written warning, saying you need to raise £50,000 worth of business in 1 month, or you're sacked. And I was working on a section which was totally new, and there was I had no chance. So I thought, you know what the hell? I got 2 meetings arranged in Scotland. Okay, both meetings back to back were an hour and a half. I spent 5 days in Scotland, just driving around Scotland. I did the 2 meetings, drove around Scotland for the rest of the time at the company's expense, stayed in nice hotels, came back, and to my surprise, the next day when I got back to the office, the first meeting I had came back with £60,000 worth of business.
Yeah.
Which is incredible. Anyway, listen, you are because it says here, I'm reading some stuff about you. You're influenced by a Swedish painter. Can you tell us about that, your photography?
Oh yeah, I can never pronounce his name. Well, him and Robert Gilmore, probably more these days. Robert Gilmore's very bold, vivid lino cuts. I like I like photography that's quite graphic and bold. So, and funnily enough, I started shooting in black and white, and I've kind of come full circle in the last couple of years. I've done a lot of black and white work and seeked out subjects and situations where I can shoot quite, bold sort of black and white imagery. And I always tell young people, actually, I've mentored a few youngsters over the last few years, and I always say to them, not only go and look at as much photography as you can to develop your photography and your ideas, but go and look at as much wildlife art as well, and look at where the artist has placed the subject in the painting, and what they've done with the colors, and how they've used the lines and stuff, because um, you know photography is an art form, and uh, it's the same sort of way of thinking in many respects. And so yeah, I've yeah I've always sort of been a great devourer of imagery. There was a time before it got really, really popular where I could, if you'd shown me a rarity picture that had been published, I could have told you whose it was and where it was taken and everything. I'd look at everything that I could. Um, and I think that's important. It's rather like, I guess, if you're trying to develop your writing, you read lots of books, you look at different people's styles and stuff. It's the same kind of creative process.
Yeah, it's very interesting you say that because I find within the world of conservation that often people are very blinkered and just look within their own world. And I think it's so important to look, as you say, to look outside and get references from outside. I mean,
Mm,
I take pictures. I take pictures. I'm not a photographer really, but ask me who my inspiration was to pick up a camera. It wouldn't be a wildlife photographer. It's a photographer by the name of William Eggleston, who did a lot of photographs, took a lot of photographs in the Midwest, America during the 70s. And I think he was the first person to start colorizing his images. But he took pictures of ordinary things like a road sign or inside of a cafe or someone's bedroom or the light shade. And I loved that because it was like a real interesting take on something that's so ordinary, but it made it beautiful. And I think that kind of, for me, fired my kind of interest in images and photography and art generally. And I
yeah,
think it's so important that, especially kids, open their minds. You got to be kind of influenced by some of the most unusual and interesting things because it all adds to your, I suppose, your perspective, doesn't it?
yeah, yeah. No, definitely. Yeah, yeah. I mean, going back to your earlier question, I um, when I set off on my professional career, I got recruited by an agency called Tony Stone, which they were the people to be with, because they had this fantastic business model whereby they just repeat sold images. So I had to start with, I had 21 pictures with them. So we're talking late 80s, early 90s now. I had 21 pictures with them, and I was making up to about £1,000 a month. And I had one particular picture just before that of a leopard I'll show you shortly, um, that I started earning more money from that one picture than I was earning from my building society sal- from my monthly building society salary. And it really was a great business model, because you could make a very, very good living out of photographing stock photography. They didn't have to have too many pictures of yours on file. and that you knew that anything really that they accepted would would do really, really well. I mean, I had a picture of a robin on a fork handle that sold over 400 times. I mean, it was used everywhere in the early 90s, and it was a really, really good living for, well, really up until the mid 2000s, I guess. And then Getty started, well, there was a company called oh God, trying to think of their name now. They're part of Getty now. Anyway, micro stock came along where they were selling pictures for $1, you know, and Shutterstock then, same sort of thing. And that started a price war. And although there wasn't much wildlife imagery being fed into those two companies, the overall effect was just to see prices start to plummet, and then it became a volume game. You just had to have lots and lots of pictures out there, you know, to give you any sort of return. And that's, so yeah, probably about 10 years ago, I could see I was still earning a decent amount from my pictures. Life was so easy, David. You went out, you took pictures, you sent them to the agents, you got your royalty checks at the end of every month. It was fantastic. It was a fantastic way of life. But I could see the writing on the wall about 10 years ago. So then I started to change my business a bit, you know, and expand out really. Oh, I've lost your.
You're on mute, David.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. I think David Lindo's on mute.
Himself.
Oh, David, yeah, you're on mute.
Can't unmute himself, I don't think.
Ah.
Should we get to showing your pictures, maybe?
Yeah. Okay.
Whilst David works that
All right.
out?
Yeah. While he's sorting that out, I'll just show you. So these are 7 or 8 what I'd call kind of, for me, were kind of landmark pictures that have steered me in some way in my career, I guess. So this was a leopard that I took back in 1988, and it was an image that was selected for one of the stock catalogues, and this was my first picture that sold really, really well and repeatedly. And I suppose this was what gave me the encouragement that I needed, that I could make a living at wildlife photography. And so, during much of the 80s, I was very obsessed with twitching rare birds and photographing rare birds all around the country, because I had the company car. I used to tear about all over the place. So this was the Balon's crake that turned up in the middle of Sunderland in 1989, May 1989, and it was incredibly tame. Lambton Glacier in the Weddell Sea, and we camped with the penguins there, and had the most fantastic week. We ended up actually in a storm, and that's another story really. We were lucky to escape off the sea ice, but the pictures I took on that trip, when I came back and distributed to my agent, sold really, really well, and I kind of lived off them for quite a while. And this has been my most successful image. It's been used in lots of adverts, and used for a big Walmart advert a few years ago, greetings cards and calendars and all sorts of things, and done really well for me. And I suppose because it's got these sort of anthropomorphic qualities that, when I was shooting wildlife photography to make a living, you're looking for these sort of qualities in the image that portray perhaps human emotion, so advertisers might pick up on them. So care and love and that sort of thing. So yeah, that's been used quite a bit. And then David held up Birds and People book earlier. That's probably been the most exciting project I've been involved with the author Mark Cocker. And that was 6 or 7 years of traveling around the world covering photographing stories about birds, really. And this is the cover shot. These are Mongolian, these are Kazakh eagle hunters from Mongolia. And that was a great trip, and did a lot of people photography for that. And then I didn't start, but I've concentrated more on trying to be a lot more kind of, I suppose, artistic, and perhaps try and create more slightly abstract imagery. It's very, very difficult to do with wildlife, and particularly birds, but when the opportunity arises, I like to try and experiment and see what I can come up with. So this was a shot of a black grouse's sort of lyre-shaped tail, and this did well for me in the Wildlife Photographer of the Year, I think 2008. And then I've come back to black and white photography a lot in the last couple of years. I'm shooting a lot now with black and white in mind, and this is not too far from home. These are not from the roost at Stettisham on the Wash, taken a couple of years ago, and a close-up of a grey seal and his whiskers. So yeah, that's my pictures. Hopefully we've got David back now, have we? How's he doing?
Can you hear and see me?
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, good. I don't know what happened. It's one of those rare instances when everything just collapses.
Yeah.
Myself included. But thank you for showing us your work. I managed to catch some of it. Fantastic work. I think one of the questions I like to ask is the actual role of a photographer per se, because I think wildlife photographers and bird photographers in particular have had a bad rap recently. I don't know whether that's warranted or not, but I've seen instances when people have not sort of taken the animals into consideration. It's more about them getting the money shot. Do you think it is as big a problem as it appears to be to some people? Because I remember when I first met you, or first knew about you, is during the times when, out there twitching, and people will be selling their photograph of the rare birds on the Scilly Isles or whatever. And I think I came across a lot of your images then. I'm not sure if I met you then, but I do remember seeing you. Has things changed since then? Do you think people are more ethical, or is there this underlying thing which is ruining it for all the other people in terms of people just going out there trying to get the money shot?
I think ethics are talked about a lot more now. Never really used to have too many ethical discussions years ago. I don't know. I'm not very big on social media, so I think some of this discussion stuff goes on social media, and I'm not particularly party to it. I think there's I mean, there are so many people taking photographs now, David, that I suppose it's like anything. You're going to get a few individuals who push it too far and go over the line, but yeah, it's a difficult one. I don't know how to answer that. I mean, if we, if certainly here in North Norfolk, people I know, if they see people going over the line, harassing something or whatever it may be, they tend to call them out. I mean, it's Yeah, I don't know.
It's a big question, I must admit. I mean, I remember leading a tour in Scotland 2 years ago, and there was this guy, big sort of guy, photographing a wheatear that was going to its nest in a burrow, and basically he kept on getting closer and closer to the point. I mean, I was watching the wheatear and I was realizing it wasn't going back to its nest. So without, hang on, what am I doing here? I'm sort of coming all over the place now. Without actually realizing, I walked up to him and I challenged him. I said, "What are you doing?" And he turned around and said, "Oh, he's actually a German, or I think maybe Dutch actually." He was saying, "Oh, this is what I do all the time when I'm back at home." I said, "Well, I think you're doing things wrong because a bird is not going back to its nest." So we had this sort of, face off basically. And in the end, he backed down. But it was quite alarming for me to see that. So that's what I always think, because I get upset sometimes. Like, for example, I go to Serbia every year to see the owls, wintering owls, and I put pictures up a little bit out of the owls that we see. And there's always one or two people that turn around and say, "Oh, look how alarmed that owl is, you're getting too close to it." And I'm thinking, well, hang on, were you there? Because basically I'm standing at a very good distance away, and that's how the owl's looking at me, I'm far away. So it kind of works both ways sometimes. It's very,
there is a friction between birders and photographers. I can give you a good example of this. 3-4 years ago, there was a barred warbler at Salthouse in the bramble bushes there, and I arrived and there was no one there at all. I didn't know where the bird was, so I was walking around looking for it, found it, and it was just in a bramble in front of me. So I stopped, I started photographing it. It was settled, it was eating blackberries. After about 10 minutes, I had a sense there was people behind me. And I turned around and there was a line of about 20 birders. They'd all been, coming along the path. And I had a guy shout at me saying, "What are you doing so close?" I said, "Well, I'm photographing it. I was here, there was no one here." And he wouldn't have it. He thought I had, walked up to it. That really frustrates me, because there's sometimes it's difficult sometimes to reason with people when they get going about something like that, and not they don't know the background. They've just come and seen someone up close without perhaps realizing that they may have taken half an hour or an hour to get close in the first place sometimes. So yeah, it's an issue. I mean, I think one of the frustrations sometimes as well is if there's a rare bird somewhere. I don't really go and photograph the rarities up here now. Very occasionally I do. There can be, a lot of pressure there, people wanting to get a picture.
yeah.
I
think, because there's another time I was on a ferry going across to an island, or coming back from an island in Estonia, and where the cars were, all of a sudden there were 2 or 3 purple sandpipers, and suddenly one of them landed on top of the car. So we went down into the car part of the boat, and we stood right at the very back, right as far back as you can go, and we waited and just watched it. And it came onto the car deck and started walking towards us. And we were lying on our bellies, and the bird walked literally so close that we couldn't take pictures with our cameras anymore. Yet when you put the information up online, how dare you get so close to the bird and disturbing it? It's just, you can't win, can you?
No.
How do you become a photographer these days? I mean, I see so many people, who are trying to sort of set themselves up as wildlife photographers. What I mean now, as you say, there's so much competition. Everyone's got a camera, everyone's got a phone. What can make you stand out?
Well, yeah, I had this conversation with a young lady a couple of weeks ago who's she's doing a wildlife photography degree course, I don't know, down in Plymouth or Falmouth or somewhere. And she was interviewing me for a course work and asking a similar question, really. And I don't think it's changed since I started out, in that you have to build your portfolio up. You have to become noticed, and you've got to monetize it. Now you can't make enough money these days through selling photographs as stock, or or for book projects and stuff. There isn't the money there anymore. So you have to be able to do lots of different things within the photography world, and that means that you've got to try and make a name for yourself. You've perhaps got to shoot in a distinctive style. It's very easy for me to say this. It's a very difficult thing to do, but to try and do stuff that other people aren't doing. But I couldn't tell you really what that is, because it seems to me that just about everything's being done, or that's how it feels often. But it's always been really, really difficult to make a living as a wildlife photographer. It's always been difficult, even at the start with the Kearton brothers, 130 years ago. It's never been easy, and there's only ever going to be a finite number of people who can do it, because there isn't the work for lots and lots of people. I think there's definitely more work in filming and video work probably than there is in stills. But if you're a stills photographer, you've got to be able really these days to be able to use a video camera and to put films together and things as well. You've got to be a jack of all trades, I think. And my advice to any young person who wants to try and get into this, I just say to them, try and get the best paid job you can with as much time off as you can, so you can pursue photography as much as you can. And hopefully you'll get to a point where you can then make the jump, because I don't see that there's a way of leaving university or something, or school, and becoming a wildlife photographer unless you were lucky enough to land a job as an assistant for a National Geographic photographer or something like that. So yeah, I think you've just got to persevere, really.
What advice would you give to people, older people who pick it up for the first time? For example, you retired, or you come into a bit of money. What advice do you give people in terms of pursuing it as a hobby?
I think success has always been being out in the field as much as possible. And if you don't come from like a birding or wildlife background, then to try and, to a degree, get into that world a little bit as well, or at least watch birds and wildlife as much as trying to photograph them, because you develop a sense of what something's going to do. I mean, you and I know, if we're watching I don't know what it might be, a heron or a bird of prey or something, if it does particular things, we would be able to say, oh, that's going to fly in a moment, or whatever. And it's being able to anticipate those kind of things. So I think it's immersing yourself within that world if you can, really. And if you're wanting to develop your photography, then yeah, looking at lots of work, asking yourself why you like that picture, why it works for you, why other pictures don't work for you, and try and develop your own. It's easy to say but hard to do, but develop your own kind of style, you know, try and shoot in a perhaps a way that you enjoy, because we all see the world in different ways, you know, and you can line half a dozen people up in front of something, and the chances are there'll be some pictures that are very similar, but there'll be lots that are very different, and it's just our different ways of seeing. So it's it's developing that as well, I think.
In your own particular photography, do you shoot from the hip, or are you the type of photographer to spend time in a hide? How do you do things?
Yeah, I do a bit of both. So I get my most enjoyment. Now I live in North Norfolk. My most enjoyment comes from just grabbing the camera, going off to Cly or walking out on the marshes at Stiffkey or something, and just going out and trying to find stuff and stalk, get close to stuff, and photograph that way, and not knowing really what I'm going to go out and photograph. I get a great deal of enjoyment. It's like kind of going out birding, isn't it? And with the camera and, you know, looking for stuff. But having said all that, I do a lot of stuff that's quite carefully planned with hides. And, you know, if I've got a commission or a specific species I want to do, then I'll work out ways of doing it, and that normally involves hide work, or so I use the car as a hide quite often. But yeah, I always think it's planning, patience, and perseverance. The 3 Ps really is what you need.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you take your camera everywhere you go?
No. I actually some days I actually sometimes just go out of my bins and go for a walk birding. So if I've been in front of the computer all day, if the sun's shining, I'll go out with my camera and walk around Clyde. But say if it's raining or something, or really dull, I might just think, right, I'll just go for a walk with my binoculars. I mean, that's a dangerous thing to do, because so many times I've had opportunities. I thought, oh God, I wish I'd had my camera here. But I do still enjoy, the birder in me still enjoys going out birding, really. So for example, Steve Rowland's a mate who lives, you know, just up the coast. On Thursday morning, we're just going out for a walk birding. So I like to do that kind of thing. But, you know, I do also like to go off and just walk around with the camera as well. And now I'm using Olympus kit, which is much lighter and smaller than the old kit I used to have. I take my camera out more and more for those kind of walks. You know, there'll be the time when my gear with tripod and everything weighed like 8 or 9 kilos, and the thought of lugging that around on a 3 or 4 mile walk, I just wouldn't do it. But now, you know, I can walk off with 1.5 kilos over my shoulder, and you don't really feel like you're carrying a camera. So I'm going a lot further, and yeah, exploring more of the North Norfolk coast with my camera than I ever used to, that's for sure.
Okay. Why do you think there are so few female wildlife photographers?
Well, there's quite a lot. I think, for example, I have 4 ladies coming to my wood on Wednesday to use my hides. And I was looking at this last year. I run photo tours here in North Norfolk and take out people for the day. And I looked, and it's pretty much a 50-50 split between male and female, the people I'm taking out. So I think there's a lot more than people realize. It's just that the women don't often want to get more into the competitive club scene and perhaps posting so much on social media and things. There's still a bit of a macho thing with a lot of blokes and photography and stuff, I think, certain areas. So I think I know lots of women who are keen photographers, and it's definitely been growing, you know, at the same sort of level as general interest in wildlife photography, I think. But it's interesting. It's not with young women, it's nowhere near as big here as it is in the States. I mean, I can remember going to the States 20 odd years ago and seeing lots of fairly young women walking around with long lenses photographing. You never see that here. So that's quite interesting. That's quite different. But I think it's getting more and more here.
Okay.
Yeah.
What is your favourite bird, David?
I think if I'd have two, it'd be a barn owl and an emperor penguin, just because emperor penguins mean quite a lot to me, because they kind of really took my career to the next level, and I just love watching. I see a lot of barn owls here, and I love taking people out to photograph barn owls here. I never tire of watching them hunt over a meadow. You know, something about them. Yeah.
Okay. And if you could be anywhere in the world, notwithstanding the current pandemic, where would you be right now?
South Georgia, I think, would be my go-to place. Whether I'll ever get back there again, I don't know, but I love it down there. I love the wildness and the remote feel.
And when you're saying South Georgia, you talk about South Georgia, USA?
No, Southern Ocean. South Georgia, as in.
Oh, of course, yes. Sorry, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, of course.
I'd quite like to go to is it Georgia where the Augusta the Masters is? But anyway, I'd like to go and watch the Masters this month at Augusta. But that's golf. That's something else.
Okay. All right. Just to let you know, Zoomers, and by the way, apologies for the well, I don't know if you had a loss in transmission. I certainly did. But just to let you know that the next In Conservation with lined up is next Monday with a lady called Catherine Norbury, who has compiled a book called Women in Nature, and it discusses, in fact, features the writings of women over the centuries and their thoughts on nature. So that should be an interesting conversation. There's more people coming up, so keep an eye on the website for additional people. So at this point, I'd like to thank you, David, for recounting some of your stories and telling us about and inspiring us about photography. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been great.
It's been real fun, apart from the technical hitch. And Zoomers, thank you very much again for being here tonight and taking your time. Really appreciate taking your time to be here, should I say. So really appreciate that. And take care of yourselves. Hope you had a good Easter, good break over the weekend. And don't forget to keep looking up.